and welcome to Inspiral Out Loud, where we're exploring ways to create a thriving future for all sentience. So we're at the start of 2021 at the moment, and there's been a lot of noise in the last few years about growing technologies in the realm of telecommunications that may or may not necessarily be for our best interest. So following on from our last technology segment, which was quite some time ago now, Mars and I are going to have a chat today about telecommunications, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So welcome, Mars. How are you going today?
I'm good, Tony. How are you? It's been a while.
I'm good. Let's chat telecommunications. Let's start off with the nitty-gritty, not so nice bits, and then we'll get into some positives. So what is the current situation around telecommunications, and how have they actually been changing?
Well, it's been a sort of a slow rollout of increasingly higher bandwidth mobile data transmission, and it's sort of a little bit like the same with it's keeping step with computer technology and mobile phone computer technology. It gives an impression that this is just a natural organic rollout of faster and faster, higher, newer upgrade, new tech, kind of just business driven models. But in reality, the technology, in terms of transmission and reception wirelessly of mobile data, it's been known for a really long time, at least since the 1960s, that there are certain bandwidths of transmission and reception that are hazardous to human health. And it's not about so much the higher the frequency, the worse it is. It's actually how it interacts with the human body and animal life and plant life is more, if you think of it in certain sections of a frequency spectrum, different portions of it will affect life in different ways. And it's within a certain zone. It's a little bit like if you think of ultraviolet light, which is actually a very large spectrum on the electromagnetic frequency scale. If you think about visible light, it's a very narrow band of electromagnetic radiation, obviously from red through to violet. And ultraviolet is actually a much larger spectrum than that. And so they've sort of graded it into UVA, UVB, and UVC. And UVA is actually one of the worst because that's what actually can cause damage to cells. But if you move over into B and C, certainly B is the one that's responsible for health. That's what gives us our vitamin D in the bloodstream when we get exposed to sunlight. So we've kind of got the bad and the good. But it's in relatively, in terms of how it affects cells internally, well, it doesn't really go that far into your skin. I think it penetrates 0.5 to 1 centimeter at most, and then it sort of gets shut off from the rest of your internal organs and everything. The problem with Wi-Fi and wireless technologies as a whole is they actually penetrate throughout the body, and they affect different organs, different components of your whole health system in different ways, not necessarily just damaging DNA through the sheer energy like in ultraviolet A on the surface of the skin, but it interacts with cells at a microscopic level that change the behavior of cells, not necessarily by damaging DNA, which is what all the supposed health standards are only measuring, is how much energy is transmitted into the cells, but it's not taking into account how that energy interacts, even at very low energy levels. And it's all tied in with frequencies, specific frequencies. So as we're moving up the chain of higher and higher frequencies, it's starting to get into the territory of becoming incredibly dangerous, despite maybe even using lower level energy in terms of energy output. It's the frequency that's more of the problem than the actual intensity of the energy coming at you. And that's not being taken into account by the health authorities. They're patently ignoring it. In fact, if you look at the way they talk about it, and even in the media, the way they talk about it, they collectively ignore that point. They just talk about energy levels and saying, well, it's just a little bit faster. That's all it is. It's just a little bit high frequency, but that's nothing because it's not exceeding the supposed health standards, which is what, as I said, just about how much strength the signal has. So we've been slowly moving closer and closer over a long period of time towards more and more dangerous frequency bandwidths.
And is that because they're the easiest to utilize, or like why would the powers that be choosing those frequencies if they're so dangerous?
Well, that's a really good question, because if you look at where it is moving to right now, which is the rollout of 5G and then 6G, it actually requires a large amount of infrastructure to implement it. The 4G and 3G and all the predecessors, they didn't have to have many towers. They were scattered here and there, but it was enough to blanket the whole environment with a signal that could penetrate through walls and buildings. And, you know, you didn't have to have units very close to each other. You could have them kilometers apart and you'd get perfectly adequate signal. 5G is different because of the frequency. More and more things will interfere with the signal. So even a rainstorm is enough to interfere with it, to the point where they have to have little relay towers every few hundred meters. So every street, every block will have to have at least one tower, probably many more than that. So they're making these smaller ones. We're talking about millions in every city. So the infrastructure for that compared to the old towers is incredibly it's not cost effective at all. It's very expensive. So it begs the question, why are they doing that?
So in your research, what have you found around how 5G is actually or potentially affecting the well-being of plants, animals, humans?
It's affecting people and plants and animals all in similar ways, although plant life is a little bit different, but certainly mammals. Bees are actually becoming a big problem. There's been some reports that of bees dropping out of the sky, which is rather unusual, and not in, I mean, you might see one once in a blue moon, but when we're talking about dozens, if not hundreds, in city areas where 5G has been installed. So that's very concerning. If you look back at independent research, both publicly and privately, into electromagnetic radiation and how it affects things, well, it can give you everything from, well, it's very well connected with cancer at this point, especially mobile phones. It's responsible for things like diabetes, which, you know, when I first read that, I thought this has got to be a joke. How can electromagnetic frequencies cause diabetes? Which is specific, that's kind of a very specific illness. But the range of problems associated aren't just limited to physical health, they're actually related to mental health as well. If you have parasites, they can aggravate the parasites, so, you know, people start feeling very itchy and things like this. Frequencies can be used to manipulate the brain to a certain extent. So there was a lot of studies done in the 60s and 70s by the CIA about how these sort of frequencies could be used as weapons. So they can induce pain on the skin, so they can use that for crowd control, which there are already experiments with that in the military, and they have active units. I don't think they've used them publicly yet, but they are available. There's been many experiments with altering behavior, inducing emotional states, and I've even seen they have the ability to, although this seems to be in closer proximity to people, but the ability to induce hallucinations, both auditory and visual. There's a whole host of problems associated with this, and there are very few benefits, and as far as I can see, really the only benefit, if you can call it that, is super high speed downloads of video games and other trivia and entertainments. I mean, I can't think of any legitimate reason why you would need such high speed for example, running a business on a phone. It doesn't seem feasible to me that that's really the motivator behind it. But what it also does really is, and perhaps you're going to ask me a question about what are the benefits that the people implementing this can see, and what's their agenda, what are they trying to roll this high-speed network out for. So if perhaps you want me to go into a little detail on that.
Yeah, and I was just going to quickly reflect on a couple of things you said, because I saw a video of a guy in the States, and he was videoing between 3 towers, and they were really close together. They were only about 40 foot apart from each other, and you could see all of these bees and you could hear them dropping, and he was just videoing all over the footpath. And somebody commented, oh, they were probably just spraying the bees so that someone could go and do with some work on the towers. But he said this has been going on, you know, he walks this path every single day, and he said every single time he goes there, there's just dead bees everywhere, and you could hear them dropping out of the sky as he spoke. Yeah, but yeah, go on with the what they can actually get out of it. Sure. Why would they be implementing this terror?
Right. Just as an extra comment on that, I have seen video footage in the past as well of birds dropping in large numbers. Not necessarily dead, but certainly dropping out of the sky. I'm sure the impact had something to play in some of the deaths. But also migration patterns being altered that hadn't ever happened before. So they're flying in the wrong direction. Instead of flying south, they're flying west.
Well, that makes sense when you think of how much nature is just reliant on the electromagnetic field to get all of its information. Like, yeah, I'm sure we've only just seen the start of that. Yeah.
So to the question of what are the movers and shakers see as benefits? Well, it starts getting into other territory. So and that could fill up hours discussing that. But to summarize, when you look at statements by institutions such as the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and corporations that develop technologies for military forces, particularly in the Five Eyes country, which is Australia, United Kingdom, Canada, the US, and England. They want this technology out because it's very easy to triangulate or geolocate the position of any technology tapped into the 5G network. So it's not just towers on the ground, it's actually including satellites. Now, I can understand why they might need satellites for international convenience, for relays, as they have done in the past for, like live broadcast television and things like that. However, they're talking about 30,000 satellites to cover the entire planet, not just from the ground, but from space as well. And the only conclusion one can derive from that is by the statements they make themselves on this technology. So they're talking about things like driverless cars. So you can basically just sit there and be a passenger in your own car. The only way that can work is through, so they state, is the only way that can happen is with 5G. look at advanced military technologies with drones and those sort of technologies, precise maneuvering, real-time tracking of other supposed enemy aircraft, things of that nature. That is all dependent on a 5G network. If you want to have a cashless society, and as we've experienced over the past year, there's been a great push towards that. It started off with suggesting that cash will cause transmission of coronavirus. Well, of course, the World Health Organization even had to step forward and say, yeah, that's not a problem. Nonetheless, businesses themselves, usually the major businesses, are pushing hard to stop people using cash and only use cards. And, you know, it's basically what they call the Internet of Things. It's like a worldwide interconnected network where everything is dependent on that 5G technology. So they've got sort of everything in their palm if they achieve this as a worldwide rollout. If everything's cashless and everything's connected into a bank, you know, we've talked in the past about how these different institutions are interconnected. Well, what that means is that they can have absolute control over individuals just by choosing if they're going to allow you to have your bank account access or not. If you have no cash, you have no way to transact with other people or businesses. So if they don't, like for example, we've all seen the gross violation of human rights in China over the last few years with the social credit system, and you know, things like having live video footage of people on giant screens in the middle of cities. And you know, if someone jaywalks, well, their video the live footage of them will pop up on these massive screens with their names and their details, saying this is, look at this naughty individual. Well, imagine that, where they're in a society where they have no cash and everything's tied in with the banks that are under the control of the Chinese government. You can see where that heads, that they will have absolute control over people. It's behavior control more than anything. Means, you know, they can relax on policing, because if people are controlling each other by pointing fingers at each other as social conditioning and limiting how much you can purchase or what you can purchase, this is just tyranny, right? Basically, it's technological tyranny.
Well, we only had to see what happened with the masks to see how quick people are to police each other.
Yes, yes. People dobbing each other in like little infant children, as though this is acceptable behavior, when instead they should be thinking, should we even be wearing masks? Should we even be accepting authority?
Yeah.
And you know,
and
that's
even outright abusing you for not wearing one.
Yeah, I mean, this is social engineering, and they're masters at it. They've done it for a very long time. So, I mean, this really, I mean, the basis of this whole thing is really about control over populations from supposed authorities that really are supposed to serve us, not control us. That's not their job, and they're stepping way outside of their bounds. And even if some governments are not in line with this, they really don't have much of a choice, because the world is run by corporations now. I mean, governments themselves are corporations, and they've all got their masters. They've all got their shareholders, and it's a very integrated collective of organizations that is very hard to break. And really the only way for people to really break free of it is to become educated and to share that knowledge, so we have enough people in the world that are willing to resist.
Yeah.
Because most people are largely ignorant of what's going on at this point.
Yeah. And I know that in that realm, we could probably do days and weeks worth of discussions about how to break free of the system. And I'm sure that will come up in the future. But just in the interest of keeping this reasonably short, do you know if there are telecommunication technologies and internet technologies that are more healthful? Like what's available to us?
Well, that is one, it's a good question, but I think that there's perhaps a greater question that should be answered. And I think that question is, do we even really need this technology to begin with? Despite the convenience of being able to, look something up on the internet while you're walking down the street, which, I've actually seen people just about crash into things and nearly get run over because they're so distracted with their screens. But I mean, you and I grew up in an environment where we didn't even have mobile phones at all. And how much of an inconvenience was it really? I mean, we didn't even consider what it would be like to have a mobile phone back then. And life was, yes, it was different, but it's like looking at what the benefits they have given us and how dependent we've become on those conveniences and what the price is for that convenience. But I think that's really the first question to ask. But there are going to be people that are going to conclude that they can't live without their mobile technology anymore. So for the answer for that, I would say is, well, there are options, there are alternatives. One of those is I did see a experiment that was presented on the internet about 10 years ago, and perhaps even longer. I think it may be about 12 years ago, actually. Which was a light-based in the infrared spectrum, which of course is harmless to us. In fact, it's healthy to be exposed to infrared light. That's what gives you the sensation of heat from fire and incandescent bulbs in the sun. And you can actually manipulate light in that spectrum to transmit data. And they were able to, back then, transmit I think it was 12 DVDs worth of data, which is close to 50 gigabytes a second.
Yeah, about 50, yeah.
Which is far quicker than 5G. And if, that there was, obviously there hasn't been health studies done on that, but I can think we can fairly safely conclude that it's based in a spectrum that doesn't intrinsically harm us, but in fact helps us. And that it doesn't mean that because you've got your system running off LED light bulbs in that spectrum, well, it doesn't have to blanket everybody else at the same time. That's the problem with wireless technology, is it blankets everything. Now, if you...
No escape.
Exactly. So what one person doing next to you on a phone, if you're sitting on a bus and someone's sitting next to you using their phone, well, it's not just affecting their health, it's affecting yours and everybody else on that bus and everyone in the vicinity of it. Whereas if you use light technology, you can actually focus it in direct beams, so it doesn't affect everybody else. And if you choose to take a risk with any of these technologies, you would be able to elect to do so without interfering with anyone else's health. You can isolate it very easily. In fact, well, it's as simple as thinking, well, if I sealed up a room in a way that light doesn't penetrate, well, you could have completely private communications in terms of people, hacking into Wi-Fi signals and Bluetooth signals and all that. Well, it's completely private as long as you isolate it visually. There are a lot of benefits to doing it that way. You can have your wireless without the health effects. If you had a focus beam, you could point it, you could situate your laptop somewhere underneath that beam. Well, that affects the laptop, but not you. There's a lot of ways you could actually use this technology in a much safer manner. So
yeah, great, thank you. I think the biggest issue for people at the moment, there is a lot of fear around 5G, and I think it's just because for a lot of it, it hasn't been tested. There's just no proof that it's safe. And most of the information to the contrary is quite often swished under the carpet. So would you like to speak a little bit, because I know that there's a lot of 5G action groups and appeals and all sorts of things, what's currently available for people wishing to make a change?
yeah, the group that's releasing a website on this technology, and they've been spending a lot of time delving into Australian and international legislation on how to push back against it using lawful mechanisms. So the idea behind it being that if we have enough people who take a little bit of time to write up documents that have to be addressed by governments and telecommunications companies, if you have enough people doing that, they have to respond and act accordingly. And it's all based on really holding governments and telecommunications to account for gross negligence, because they have been negligent. They have not done proper studies on this technology. It's as though they think that, oh, because no one's kicked back enough on the previous technologies and, you know, people aren't dropping like flies, that somehow it's safe. That's basically how they operate. And so they've pulled out enough evidence from, you know, professionals both in the telecommunications industry, like I mentioned before, some of the research that's been done by the CIA and similar organizations developing these sort of frequencies, weapons technologies, mind control, emotional control, etc. Medical health professionals, experts at radio frequencies and how they affect the health. There's a mountain of evidence that this thing is actually demonstrably dangerous. It's not a case that it's just that it hasn't been proven to be safe. It's already been demonstrated to be dangerous, period. And the independent research done like that is not being addressed by the supposed health authorities that that govern the health and safety standards that the governments look to when they approve or disapprove of a technology being rolled out on in a public space. So they're collectively ignoring that, and these documents address that by basically, if you make a claim in law documents or legal documents more precisely, you have the burden of proof, and if you don't have the proof, then you sort of lose. But if you provide professional opinion and evidence and demonstrate that that is in violation of the very legislation that the governments write, then they're now accountable to it. And you can do this in every country. So it's a pretty good tactic, and I think they're going to see some pretty positive results. Some independent lawyers have actually done this themselves, and they've been able to knock off one or two towers from being erected, but that hasn't prevented the entire thing. Their strategy is to have as many people as they can to roll this out with just basically just swarming them with letters, and done in a correct legal procedure that's actually been overseen by a barrister and a Supreme Court judge. So what they're coming up with is looking pretty good.
And for someone like me that doesn't have much versing in law at all, is it easy to kind of understand and to be able to go through it? And because I know that wording is really important in these sort of things.
Yeah, they've done their best to write up very precise instructions that are easy to follow. It does take some work by the look of it. It does require a little bit of reading, but you know, it's really a matter of, well, how important are these things to people? If people are genuinely concerned, and I think that they should be, then you know you can't put a price on your health. And if it takes you even a day to write a letter, isn't it worth it? But they've done their best to make it as clear and precise as possible, so that and it doesn't, you know, the thing is with legal documents is it's more about the intent than the specific wording. I mean, if you were receiving I've seen legal documents even from lawyers that are just atrocious, like they're just incomprehensible gibberish, and it's not because it's written in legalese, because I can recognize the legalese, so that they're not even written correctly, and yet they still hold in court and things like that. So it doesn't mean that it has to be absolutely precise. It's just better if you can. They will give it a little bit more weight if it's written well.
Yeah.
So but at the end of the day, really what's important is the intent
Mm.
and the meaning behind the words. So,
Good. Oh.
yeah.
And in the meantime, because we don't know how long this little battle's going to be playing out around the world, so it's possible that we might just have to deal with it for a while. So I've been looking at, how we can actually limit exposure to it, and how we can actually just limit exposure to any EMFs, because a lot of people are becoming increasingly sensitive to EMFs. So I mean, some of the basic things are just to be using plugged in internet wherever you can. And, I tend to use Zoom over plugged in internet rather than using a phone to make phone calls, and things like that. Have you got any suggestions for people that might want to just reduce their exposure?
We did sort of cover a little bit of that in a previous interview, I believe, but as sort of as a recap, and there's a few things people can do. It's really a lot of it is really the accumulative effect of long-term exposure. So the first point is really to just minimize daily exposure as much as you can. And some of that is an inconvenience, but one thing that probably isn't inconvenient for most people is simply switch your phones off at night time, especially, so your body has at least a 6 to 8 hour period of regenerative potential. Certainly don't keep them near you all the time. Like, a lot of people have this habit of just constantly holding on to them, keeping them in their pocket, carrying them around wherever they go, in the house, in the car. Keep them away from you physically as much as you can. I would not be doing things like putting phones in a place where they can't receive very good signal from the towers. If you have locations in your home that are very isolated, if you've got, metal fly-wire screens and things like that, what that effectively does is it makes the phones output even more power, which of course also exposes you to more power, just so it can reach the tower in the first place, because they constantly ping each other. So maybe put it on a windowsill where it's, not being interfered with by thick walls, doors, all those sorts of things. And you can very easily see that. You just move your phone around the house and you'll see the signal strength. Well, the higher signal strength is actually better if you see it on your meter on your phone. What else can you do? There are more exotic things that people can do if they're especially for people that are hypersensitive. There's actually paints that you can buy that you can paint your walls. It probably is a little bit expensive for most people. That might be difficult for renters, but certainly people that own their own homes, you can perhaps at least start with your bedroom. I'd be focusing there primarily. Actually,
Dietrich Klinghardt was talking about exactly if you can't afford to paint your room. He said even a few rolls of cling foil, actually sticky tape to the walls and then earthed, will actually give you a kind of messy but effective and cheap, about a $20 emergency shielding option.
Right, yeah. I've seen some more interesting versions of that too, like people building effectively cages, like fly wire mesh cages for their beds, things like that, and they are effective. But yeah.
And there's actually on the website, you can actually, and I'll give the details to this shortly. If you sign up and subscribe, they've actually got some documents, an ebook, and some infographics to send out as well that have a lot of information on this. And the other thing, the other topic in relation to that is actually dealing with electromagnetic sensitivity, which is something that I've had to deal with for quite a long time. And I find one of the best things to do is actually just get my feet into the earth, and my hands actually are very sensitive even to the computer. And sometimes I've just got to go outside and put my hands under the trees on the ground for a good 20 minutes to try and discharge. And there's a lot of foods. I know the antioxidant rich foods and phenolic acid. Do you know if that's how you say it? Phenolic? Phenolic?
Is it PHENY?
PHENOLIC.
Yes, phenolic.
So apparently that is really good to assist with EMF damage as well. So foods like ginger and turmeric, cinnamon, cloves, like those kind of nice spicy things. And magnesium, my friend told me to stick my feet in a magnesium bath. So I actually had like a basin of water under my computer in my office. So sitting there with my feet in magnesium water while I was working. It got a little bit much after a while. And I've also got an earthing sheet that I bought quite a long time ago, and I've got an earthing mat for my computer. And yeah, so there's lots of different tools that you can use as well, just to deal with things while they're still active in the air until we get out somewhere where we can hopefully try and escape.
Yeah, definitely. And like earthing sheets are great because they don't not only protect you from cumulative damage to some extent, from EMFs, but also from the lower frequency EMFs that emanate from the wiring and housing and those sorts of things as well. It does a good job of that, because things like that, they actually build up a charge in your body. And we're walking around largely with shoes that have got rubber soles, which is an insulator, so most people are constantly floating effectively above the earthing point.
Yeah.
And being constantly charged, all their cells in their body are being constantly charged up, and by earthing yourself, you discharge all of that, which is so beneficial. So
definitely,
it's a very good idea. I know that there are people that even make earthed floors, and they walk around barefoot in their homes so that they're constantly earthed inside the home.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be doing that. I can't wait. So on a slightly better note, let's look at some of the things that we can dream in for a thriving future. And some of the things that have come to my mind on the highest level is simply that our governments are replaced with some kind of institution or organization that actually has our well-being at the core of its purpose. So that's my little, just putting that out to the ether. Let's see what we can do. And I've had some slightly, let's call them interesting insights through energy exchange around how potentially in other, let's call them realms, that we can actually tune into information. And one is Auntie Jude, that a lot of people will already be familiar with some of her work. And she was actually talking to me about tuning into the trees and about their methods of communication. And it reminded me a little bit of that guy. We saw a talk some time ago, a guy who was talking about the electric universe theory, and talking about how if you push something there, it's everything, it affects everything from a distance. There's no traveling to have a cause and effect. And she likened it to that. And she said, basically, if you hug a tree here, then a tree in Norway will feel it straight away. Like, she was just saying how everything's connected, and just the communication tools are there. We just don't quite know how to relate to them yet, or how to interact with them yet. And also, I've heard a lot about the availability of information in water, and how it seems to not only store but then access information from the field that can then be channeled through it. And this is a little bit far outside of my realm of actual knowledge. This is just exploring ideas, but I think it's nice to kind of look at. And I remember Greg Braden was doing did a session where they're looking at computer chips, and they had a little computer chip that had water in it, and they were seeing how much information it could hold, and it held so much that it just became impossible, and they realized it wasn't actually storing it within itself, that somehow it was accessing information from the field. I don't know how it worked, but it was very curious. And I just feel like we've got so much to learn and explore outside of the boundaries that we think we're in as far as these possibilities go. And one other thing that I've seen is kind of frequency type machines. I'm pretty sure we've spoken about this in earlier about what Matt Bellier was talking about in one of his interviews with Joe Montano on collective evolution, about some people he met in the States, elders of different Indigenous tribes, and they actually had technologies or plans for technologies that would basically emit a frequency that was in tune with the Earth frequency, and so it would override other harmful frequencies for 300 meters. And you know, I'm sure that there's so many different technologies like that that are available that are just still under wraps, but I'm sure that once we're under appropriate governance, that those kind of things will be released. Do you have any knowledge, or have you seen or heard any interesting ideas around different kinds of technologies like that?
I've heard of a few from time to time throughout my researches over the decades, and yeah, there are some things that look promising. The problem with those sort of technologies is it's very difficult to find institutions that would study them to prove their effectiveness. So you're kind of a little bit at the mercy of claims. So I would look at the ones where they do actually provide some kind of evidence. I know there are a couple of around. I haven't, but to be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at those. I've sort of been more just trying to uncover what's actually going on, and sort of bigger picture solutions. Because you know, at the same time, those technologies, you know, if they're effective, yes, they will protect you, but we're all in this together, you know, and it's not just about the health effects of these technologies. There's also, you know, the other concerns of, you know, what they're planning for this worldwide network with, you know, basically a tyrannical dictatorship. So I think, yeah, it's good to look after your health, definitely, and look into those things, but I try and constantly keep a micro and macro perspective and everything in between. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you have to look at the big picture. Sometimes you need to look at the details and to see how it all kind of connects and fits together. And those solutions are part of all of that. So I would say look at all of it.
Yes, indeed. So for people that want to take lawful action, what can they do? Where can they go?
The project that these guys are working on is it's know, as in knowledge, know, KNOW 5G.com-law.org.
And do you know if there's an email address, or would they get straight on via the website?
I believe there is one, but there's a contact form on the website, if I remember correctly. Okay. So that should get you through to that. But I believe the email address was demandsafetech, I think, at protonmail.com.
Yeah. And there's also quite a few social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Parler, and Gab Social. And that's all under safe technology, demand safe technology as well, I believe. So great. Well, thank you for that. Have you got any final words before we chuff off today?
No 5G.
Indeed. And thank you for listening at home. Please remember to subscribe to this channel and like this video, because we like that kind of thing. And if you've got any comments, let us know if you've got any cool ideas about different ways that we can communicate that don't require nasty technologies, that just have healthful ones instead. So thanks for joining us, Mars. I'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Danny.
All right, and thanks for watching. Till next time, my friends, be well, keep dreaming the good dream. Ciao for now.